elevating your self-awareness toward your purposes, right? And have a purpose.
Yeah.
Like have a dream that's so big that it won't be fulfilled in your lifetime. There's really nothing wrong with being an irrational optimist in a world of rational pessimists. What difference does it make? We're all still dealing with reality, right? And trying to eat food, live indoors, have clothing, not squander our gifts, but like be magnanimous. Have big dreams.
Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman.
Well, welcome back to the newest episode that we're putting out here of the How to Buy and Sell a Business Successfully. My name's Jake Wayman. My wife and I are the Orange Theory Fitness franchisees here in the Wichita market, and I'm also a fractional business development consultant for Wayman Consulting Group here in town. And I'm joined by my amazing co-host and founder of this podcast, Sam Foreman.
Oh, thank you, Jacob. I'm so excited to be here today. And after that build up, I'm gonna make sure to kind of try to do better than I normally do on the podcast. I'm Sam Foreman. I'm an M&A attorney. Work with a lot of businesses buying or selling a business or kind of growing their business in a successful direction. I have two amazing children who like to randomly come up and punch me in uncomfortable places. I love my life. It's the best part of my life right now is this morning I sat down with my youngest and he made me coffee in these tiny plastic cups. It was imaginary coffee, but he's very particular.
Yeah.
I think he's going to do something quality control related in life and he's going to be fabulous at it.
Sam, you just make me feel bad because you bring your kids up and I never talk about my kids. I love my children. All three of them.
You do love your children, and I feel like you talk about your kids in every other setting that we're in except for the podcast.
Okay. And today we're joined by...
Yes. Oh, yeah. We have a guest today, and we're really excited that we do because otherwise our audience would have to listen to just us talk about things like I would get into probably my favorite boilerplate clauses in a contract, and then people would probably have an aneurysm. But instead, we have something much better than aneurysms. We have John Bachura here with us today. My friend John has recently gotten involved with an organization called Legasus Group, where he works with family-owned businesses, and I think a really cool way to help build a culture around the family as an enterprise, as opposed to just building a culture within the business itself. And he can explain that much more eloquently than I can. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about getting to know John is the priority that he places on people and how he takes the time to really understand organizations and systems and how to optimize them, and his understanding of the people side of the process. And the importance of the patient, kind of long-term view of things. There's so much pressure, in today's business world to kind of gravitate towards and optimize around the urgent, and that sort of short-term prioritization, I think, undermines a lot of long-term value for folks. And one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit more today is that a sale, even though we talk on this podcast a lot about, the exit, about selling your business successfully, sometimes you're not looking for a sale, or you're not looking for a sale for, to an external buyer. You're really thinking about, how do I successfully transition this to a family member? And so, kind of today we're going to focus a lot on talking about, family-owned businesses and some of the unique challenges and opportunities they face. But before we do that, John, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and perhaps you could start with your favorite kind of tea and where to get it. As a fellow tea drinker.
One of my favorite subjects. Well, I'm John Bachura and grew up here in Wichita, West Sider, and spent my whole life thinking that I was going to save jazz music. And then I finally took economics in college, and I was like, oh, that's why. Okay. But But my entrepreneurial journey is very much entangled with my family, and it begins with my parents seeing that I had this mismatch of desire with means, and they saw this great opportunity to create a learning opportunity where I got what I wanted and I earned it, but at the same time was able to cultivate a skill set, a way of being, a paradigm of approaching people that was very much involved in business, but it was formative as a person, as a whole person, right? And so I'll take credit for the fact that we're not normally talking about our children in this podcast or studio, and today we are, and I think that's wonderful because that is really the focus, and more so than that, grandkids, great grandkids, that this idea of Simon Sinek did not invent the concept of the infinite game. Just so we're all clear on that. He did not invent that. He wrote a book about it, but it's not his idea. And so getting entrepreneurs, successful business people who are really good at manifesting their dominion in the now. Like, Jacob, you make stuff happen. I know this. This is why you're successful. You get stuff done. So it's hard then to shift from get stuff done now or as soon as possible because we need it done. We do need it. But to what about 2 or 3 generations away? I won't be here. What can I do now today that will help to, position my descendants, but also my community, because the family is the base unit of our society. Everything comes from the family. Whether it's the economy or the polity or our cultural, social institutions, it's all people, and people come from people. Women, actually, like real women make human beings, and it's a miracle. If you haven't experienced it, which you have, it's a miracle. So really focusing on that infinite idea of what is it that the world needs from this person, from this individual that may not even be alive yet, and how can I help them do that, and thus the world. So it becomes every opportunity to interact and think about and plan for and execute, and it's a way to align your family and all of your descendants, and then all of those that came before you, to the common good, to the dignity of people and the flourishing of society. Not just in terms of what we do for fun, but what we do for work, and how we make hard choices, and how we handle justice, and how we, deal with poverty and excess and everything that we're all really trying to figure out right now, right? Because that's what business does. It solves problems. So going back to that grain of the person that may not be alive yet, and how does then business and mergers, acquisitions, growing, buying, selling, cultivating, ecosystem building, networking, how does all of that align to perpetuate the greatness of our world? I suffer from zero nostalgia. I think we live in the greatest time that's ever been. And I have no qualms about saying that, because it is a great time where if you want to, you can do the things that you want to do, but you just have to be really good at doing it with other people, and thinking in terms of as long out into the future as you possibly can. So that's kind of where we're at with Legasus Group. And the idea, it's funny, I've been nervous to come in here and say, just for the record, Legasus Group wants to perpetuate the business in the family. Right. And so the nuance of, okay, well, then what does that mean in terms of mergers and acquisitions if we're not actually ever going to sell to an external body?
Yeah. But I think it's important. When I think about like a sale or a merger and acquisition kind of event, and I think about what you're talking about in terms of perpetuating that sort of that family ownership of a business, for example, is, to me, it all starts with what are the priorities? What is the main objective or the main couple of objectives that, the owners, in this case, like a family business might have.
Mm-hmm.
And then how does whatever it is, either the transition from one generation to the next, or, a sale of the business, or, growth through acquisition, whatever that might be, how does that line up with those top objectives? Because at a fundamental level, all of the work that we do, whether it's on the M&A side of things or whether it's helping somebody build something that could last for, 1,000 years, is about how do we maximize the value of the opportunities that we're entrusted with.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the answer is, well, time to go sell, right? And sometimes the answer is, I'm so glad that I talked to somebody early enough in the process to understand what option I could have to build a culture that will help me prepare my children, my grandchildren, to be able to carry on the legacy of ownership here in a way that enriches their lives rather than, burdens them and sets them back, which we'll get into some of that here, I'm sure, as part of our conversation. But I think these are very much integrally linked. But people need to know, and this is part of why we're having this conversation, that sometimes the answer isn't I'm building something to sell. But all of it starts with this fundamental understanding of I know what I want and I know what's important. I know where that deeper meaning is and where I'm going. And then the specific strategy is the answer on how to steward that opportunity, for example. And that's what I get excited about. I also get excited about sports. If anyone's wondering, it's almost football season. And by almost, I mean it's several months away, which, hey, that's great.
Olympics are coming up. I'm excited for that.
Yes.
Well, and the thing, and we're here in Wichita, and I mean, it's very similar in other cities too, but Wichita is very family business oriented. A lot of family businesses here in town that have stood the test of time. And I think with Legasus Group, I mean, it's, people are looking to build legacies, keep the legacies going, and it's great because it keeps that business in Wichita. And so with the companies that Legasus works with, I mean, what does that look like? I mean, do you guys focus on a specific industry or type of family orientation or what? I mean, it's like Wichita is a family business town, and the work you guys do is so critical because keeping those businesses in Wichita is so very important.
And I mean, even beyond Wichita, I mean, I know you serve folks all over the region and I assume nationally as well. But when you look at that tie that often a family has to a community, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, I derailed the question. Go on.
Well, no, there is, I mean, I'm Catholic and my business partner is Catholic. And so we're looking for people that have a Christ-centered focus. And this idea of how, one, it is important to love God with all your heart, all your might, just everything you've got, every moment, and I'm not doing so great at that all the time. I mean, I think that's the challenge of being a human. But then with that, what does that look like? Like how does that manifest? And one of the best ways to do the other of the two great commandments of love your neighbor, one of the best ways to love your neighbor is for them to be like your customer. Because then you're wrapped up in their well-being, their wealth, their success, their flourishing, whatever it is that you provide for them. Orange Theory is a great example. Like you could be successful in every other field, but if your physical health and emotional health, which is directly tied to it, then you're destitute. You're in poverty. It doesn't matter how many things you have or people you lead. If you're, on the floor dead practically, then nothing's happening, right? So then how do you then love your neighbor and then realizing that it's more than just the person that lives next door. It's the person that you live with, right? The person inside your home that is there and you have some things that you like about them, that you don't like about them. How do you then, and I'm talking about like wife, spouse, husband, children, how do you then love them in a way that is more than just amorous love, the love of the wanting their good? In Italian they say ti voglio bene. I want your good. I want what's good for you. And that's hard for children to understand of their parents, but that's what we're after. And so then through the vehicle of enterprise, this thing that if successful and sustainable throws off some wealth, which can have, an amplification effect. Wealth just amplifies who we are, I believe. So then how do we then use that in a way to then want and deliver and execute what is good for the neighbor in our home, the neighbor in our marriage, the neighbor in yourself? Like you are your own neighbor. I mean, it's a little bit of a schizophrenic idea, but like, it's not just you in here, right? Like, and then also the people that you share space with in the community. So next door neighbors, people on the block, people in the neighborhood, people downtown, people in the peer groups and the networking groups and all that. Just kind of this rippling logarithmic effect. And so that leads into then, okay, how do they answer, the question of people are fill in the blank, right? So to get an idea of, do they see people as a means to an end, or are people another beautiful child of God, a being that has a destiny, that has a vocational purpose, that is struggling with all kinds of things? And how then does my life, my enterprise, my philanthropy, my relationship, my just being able to hear and listen and see that person, how does that help them to grow and flourish? And it all rolls up together. I mean, like, one of the problems in the modern world that we work on is disintegration, that we want to say, well, this is this and that is that, and there's division between. So there's work-life balance. Well, that in itself is a disintegrated idea. As much as possible, we want to bring all that stuff together into a unified, integrated whole. And that, to me, is one of the core purposes. Is, do they see enterprise as a way to build just pure monetary wealth so that they can then extract and live the life that they want to live? Or do they see themselves as stewards of a great economic engine that has the ability to drive the common good, to drive flourishing of individuals, be that vehicle that unlocks the great future that we have ahead of us?
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, this is for me, this is such a different way of talking about business than a lot of folks are used to, because I think, just to use the term you use, that disintegrated approach, we take business and we remove a lot of its meaning, and we create this sterilized, separate sort of thing that competes with often so many other areas of our life, because we haven't, I think, as individuals and as families, figured out and clarified for ourselves, hey, here's what's most important. And when we know and we have that clear focus of, hey, here's what's most important, we have the ability, I think, to line up all of the things in the same direction and to understand how to put them in their right place. And then I think, to your point of, it stops being about the tug of war between, my time, my desires, my attention, my talents, and everything, between these two separate things that are pulling in different directions. But instead, it becomes about the harmony of how all of these things, and I'll use a spiritual word that I like, become sanctified in the process, and we redeem that effort in a direction to which we're called. I think that's a really powerful thing. Because when you take your whole self, when you take your whole family unit, and you have this direction, and everything is kind of lined up, pushing in that direction, man, that is powerful.
It's beautiful.
And when it's not, like, what happens? John, tell me more about what happens when people aren't aligned with that.
Brick by brick, it just divides us, not only externally between you and me, this group, that group. Brick by brick, it builds walls between externally, but also inside. You build a wall between you and the world. Love Myers-Briggs, right? Self-awareness is a good thing. But
well, to each their own.
They have convinced everyone that you are an introvert. It's not true. At that moment, at that testing time, you rated as a trait of being introverted. That's not what that actually means. It's never what they intended. Those tests are there to give you an idea, a self-awareness. It is not determinate in that this is how you are, and this is how you always were, and this is how you will always be, because we participate. And life happens and things change and we change. And like, I wasn't really completely aware of my true vocation, sadly, as a father until I was like changing the diaper of my second child. I was 44 years old. And the beauty of the still small voice, because I was in there, I was disintegrated. I was like, I need to be doing all this other stuff right now. But here I am. And this voice in my head that was like, this is what you're here for. And a sense of justice in that this is what you owe this child. He didn't ask to come here. You brought him here. So he is due your at least attention now. In this moment where you're doing this, we would call it a corporal work of mercy by changing his poopy diaper, right? He can't do it. Yeah. And if he doesn't do it, he gets sick and probably dies, right? Like that's the end. And so this real sense of justice in that, what do I owe these people? What do I owe my community that created my worldview, this wonderful entrepreneurial community of Wichita, Kansas, where there's something in the water here. There's something in the culture here. And we are blessed to just breed this co-collaborative, co-creative entrepreneurship that crosses race and gender. It's like just the way it has been. It's a beautiful thing. And I have my philosophies about why it probably happened the way that it did, but like it did, and here we are. So what do I owe for that? Right? Because I woke up one day and here I was. And it's like, cool, I get to do this and be this guy. And this is fun. And I get to like lean into who I am. But if this was a different community, a different ecosystem, I wouldn't flourish. I would probably, I mean, not saying that I'm flourishing. I feel like I'm flourishing. I mean, I definitely would introduce you to my wife and children. But the idea of like where there's justice in there, there is a distributive justice that's a responsibility of all of us. And business, and certainly in terms of mergers and acquisitions. I mean, honestly, there is a direct tie here. The place to plant the entrepreneurial spirit is in the right habitat. So we have that in the community. And business, there is no substitute in learning by immersion. Right. And so the M&A space is so critical. Once you have the like initial, like first generation, get that economic engine going so that it's throwing off the revenue that we need so that it sustains. And then we take it over here and we're like, okay, so I got this little guy, this little rugrat of mine that I created with my spouse. And so he has these traits and he's interested in these things. Well, maybe we go, instead of trying to build from scratch, maybe what we do is we go find something that's already running so that he can begin at the place where he is. Maybe he's not a startup. There are differences. There are generational entrepreneurs. There are serial entrepreneurs that are startups, like apostles, right? Like they like to start stuff. I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast, but they start stuff, right? But
we'll censor it out if you do cuss.
They shouldn't stay. If you're a startup person, you shouldn't stay. There's operational entrepreneurs. There's innovation. There are change makers. There are rescuing entrepreneurs, people that come in and fix stuff, right? And so identifying that trait in your children can help you identify, well, do we need to start a lawn mowing landscaping business with little Johnny, or should we maybe go buy one? Or maybe he can become a partner in one, because wherever he's at or she with the business, you can actually align all of those essential elements to get the jump.
What's fascinating, so I grew up in a family business, and my parents actually never really wanted any of us to be entrepreneurs, and now all of us are entrepreneurs. Classic. And my oldest brother's in business with my dad, and I'm actually working with them as well too now. And it's fascinating how, you know, what they want to instill in us, kind of back to your kids, is they just want to instill in us the ability to create, the ability to be who we wanted to become. But what we found is we wanted to emulate what my father was, and what my mom never wanted to call herself an entrepreneur, but she was a realtor, and so she's in real estate. So yes, you're an entrepreneur, and she never saw herself that way, but she was. I mean, my mom was phenomenal at that occupation. But I think it's just knowing and instilling in them and giving them the environment to create and becoming who they want to become. And just so happens that's where we ended up going. We're not in the original business my dad had started, but he went through a lot of turmoil with that business, but then ended up starting another thing with my oldest brother, and now I'm starting to be involved. And it's just very cool how they created that environment for us to do that.
Yeah.
It's maybe in different businesses than it has been in the past, but that environment was still there.
That's essential, because I heard so many things in what you said, Jacob, that one, mom is the most entrepreneurial role you can have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I
Preach.
love, they'll resist the noun entrepreneur, but they do the verb entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that tries to divide us when it comes to business and entrepreneurship, is like, we want to talk about who is and who isn't, but that's a noun. Let's talk about what you said, creating, right? Entrepreneurship is about the verb of the doing.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I'm entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Right. And also, it's really great when someone reflects that back to us and says, you're very much an entrepreneur. You wouldn't say you are, but you are. And then here's why. And then they go, oh, maybe I am. Oh, and then you open up whole worlds for her.
Yeah.
But then creating that space where you see the trials and overcoming them. And then that's what I love about like generational entrepreneurs, because you talk about different things at the dinner table.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you guys ever, were your folks ever like, here, sell me this pin, or create a business around this coat hanger, or that kind of thing?
No, it was my dad actually made us start a company when we were in high school. It was called Salt Dogs, and we would deliver salt for water softeners is what we would do. And then we were in the car wash industry, my family was, and we had to go, like, I remember this, I will never forget this. It was 11 o'clock at night on a school night. My job was to be cleaning the car wash. Well, my dad decided to pop by that car wash to see if I'd cleaned it. Well, I did not. And so he popped into my room at 11 o'clock when I was asleep and said, hey, get your butt out of bed and go clean that thing. And so it was more of the lessons. It wasn't, honestly, my mom really tried to keep the dinner table family.
Nice.
Family discussions, not about business, because business was stressful. Business would come up, but it was never that push of saying like, hey, sell me this pen.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that. It wasn't transactional in our family.
Good. Very
relational. And I think that's why we've now come around to all working together, because it wasn't this idea of like, you're going to be coming into this business. It roundabout way came that way.
That's beautiful.
And now I'm also in business with my wife as well. And it's that's a whole nother dynamic when your wife is your wife and also your business partner too. But it's just fascinating.
You need that, right? And I love what you said also. So many of the clients that we get to work with, the business has been so dominant at the dinner table that what their culture that they have is a business family culture, and it's hard to shift to a family culture.
Yeah.
But to start there and stay there. And then ultimately what we all need, whatever level of association in the human community, what we need is a human culture that is focused on the dignity of each individual person, right? And that changes the entire conversation from, well, our culture is what is it? Toxic. Okay. Well, do you answer this question? People are fill in the blank, and then
toxic. Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how do we change that? And you need to have different answers to that question. But I love what you said, Jacob. That it's a family culture, and that helps to resist the ever impending trap of the family business trap. And the kids grow up thinking, I've got to be like dad. I've got to be like mom. I've got to literally like step into those shoes and duplicate what they did. But that's entropy. You're going to perpetuate an enterprise that isn't fitting with the modern world, with modern challenges. We have to continue to be creative and imagine the future, and and create the space for that innovation to occur. Because first generation creates the enterprise that sustain, if it sustains. Second generation typically professionalizes. So we get the processes, we are able to expand and handle more employees. We get an HR department. We actually hire an HR person, right? Yeah. We might get some non-family executive leadership, right? We might expand in our vertical, like we make this, so maybe we make this other thing. Third generation, the trope is that the third generation ruins it. But the best thing to do is that if it's the current generation really sees that they have the responsibility to invest in the development of the human capital of the rising generation, not just of the new hires and the people that are not necessarily family of blood that are working in the family enterprise, but invest in understanding and helping them to discover their own entrepreneurial vocation. And And it doesn't have to directly align with the current family enterprise. It could be that maybe we need to create structures that are able to own various different types of enterprises, right? Maybe we need a holding company. Maybe we need an official philanthropic entity of some sort, so that if the rising generation has that in them, if they've been invested in and developed to identify that that's the direction that they should go, then how does that align to the legacy of the family? And the main thing, what is our purpose? Then it's good. Let's go. How do you discern if that's God's will for you? Well, does it involve, damaging the dignity of other human beings? No. God can work with that.
Jake and Sam here.
Thank you for joining us. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and especially leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes. Really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, 1 star, it's on Sam.
Yeah, it's definitely on me.
And I think it doesn't have to necessarily be like in our family, we have 3 boys, and the oldest one's is my dad, like I mentioned, and I'm also an entrepreneur, but my middle brother's an amazing engineer. And he's good at it, very good at it, and probably makes way more money than all of us do. But like that's what he wants to be. That's his lane, but he's still not, but he's still active in our family. It's not like just because he's not in the business. It's like that's where I think what I see with successful family businesses is it's like they still keep the family first. Family stays first, not business.
Amen.
And I think that's where, like, when you're talking about transitions, like we're talking about, Sam, is like, if you're not putting family first and business first, then ultimately that family business is going to fail. I'll be honest. I mean, it's because you're putting the wrong thing first, and like our last guest on here was talking about keep the main thing the main thing. Yeah. And I think in family businesses, what's that main thing? Family. And you have to, and that's what you have to decide. What is that main thing? And for us, it's family. Like that's one thing that I was so afraid of going to work with my dad and my brother is affecting that relationship. My dad's my best friend, and it's like I don't want to lose that with him because he's my mentor. But now, and that's why I'm not coming on as their employee. I'm coming on as a partner to work alongside them, not necessarily as an employee of theirs too. So, but yeah, I think it just goes back to what is that main thing when you're thinking about your family business.
Yeah, you want to kind of gut check and be like, which one's holding the family together? Is it the business or the family?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if the business goes away, which businesses tend to do, right? Only 2 things happen to businesses. They either get sold or they go out of business, right? So that's a temporally limited thing. But the soul of the family, if the family can hold the family together, if that's the main thing, it's like, let's make sure that nothing damages the family, that everything that we put our hands on and invest in is going to add to the family culture. It's going to add to the human flourishing and the capital of us. Yeah. It's John Paul II wrote this encyclical called Laborem Exercens, and he talks about 3 natures of work. There's the objective. So what are we trying to accomplish, right? We're trying to figure out a way to manufacture, what was it, Jesus chickens? I don't even know what that is, but that's Chick-fil-A. The objective, right? And then then the subjective. So like the environmental health and safety of that. Like if you're a blacksmith hammering hot steel all day, you're going to get sinewy, strong, and tan, right? So that's the subjective. But what's going on inside of you is the most important. The transcendent nature of the work. What is it doing to you? What's the soul craft, as Michael Novak would say, of what it is that you're doing? That's what's great about this, is that you're literally holding space for people to have really important conversations about the work that we do that's kind of mystic to some folks, right? But it's actually not rocket surgery. There's rules and clear pathways that then open up for the creativity, that create and hold the space for the new, in Latin, the ex nihilo, the from nothing, right? Like this was not here before. So how did it get here? Or it's not here now. We envision it. How do we make it happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think within the family businesses, if you do have young kids that you're thinking, maybe one day I want them to be in there, but it's got to be their decision. And, and it's having those discussions and building that and having that environment in your family to openly talk about it. And if they say they don't want to be a part of the business, then that's okay. And I think so much is like, because like here we talk about M&A, selling, those sort of things. And having it's like when you're starting the business, it's like, starting with the end in mind. If it is possibly wanting to make this and building this into a generational company, you need to build it that way.
Yeah.
If you're building this just to sell it, then you build it that way.
Yep.
There's different ways to think about it, and it's having those conversations early and often within your family of what this looks like, because you can't. Again, you're talking about the work-life balance. There's no separation there.
Right.
Work and life. I mean, you have to find them coming together like this. Because I'll be honest, at my dinner table is we often my wife and I often talk about what's going on in Orange Theory, because it's the time we can sit down and talk about it, but we also want to keep the family first. We've struggled with that, but it's been 4.5 years and into that business, which is crazy.
I want to talk about that a little bit more. It feels like there's so much tension everywhere between business and family.
Mm-hmm.
And as I sit here and I look at, where I feel like people do it really, really well, it's not something where the two compete for the same thing. It's something where the two become an extension of the same thing, at least when they're put in their right place. And it feels like a lot of people either, and I'd be curious for your take on this, guys, both of you, put business in the wrong place. I mean, to further use more spiritual language, business becomes an idol. Business becomes that altar that we worship at, and everything gravitates around that.
Yeah.
And then it consumes our direction, it consumes our affections, and that's what we bring home to the dinner table. And it's not that business is bad. It's not that it's something that is unholy, but it is something that it feels like when it is in its wrong place, it diverts us from our calling to create a common good for folks, to devote our lives in a way that multiplies human flourishing. And when it gets out of its right place, then it becomes something completely different. But I think I like that concept that you talked about earlier, John, of like the integration of all of these things. And business becomes an extension of that, becomes an extension of the direction that we're already going. And then it doesn't become a diversion along the way that we somehow have to keep from taking away from our families or taking away from our lives. It becomes something that's this beautiful additional part of it because it's in its right place.
Yeah.
And because we're a family that's committed to, as an example, we're a family that's committed to, making our world a better place through the work that we do, through, how we impact people, how we invest in the lives of our neighbors, our friends, our employees, et cetera. And one of the ways we do that is we build an amazing business that creates jobs, that, is really intentional with caring for the people that we serve so that they care for the people that they serve, and so on and so forth. Instead of it being something that's like, oh, I can't talk about business right now because I've got to keep it separate, because there's not an understood connection between what we do in our work in a business setting and what we're doing in our work with our life.
Yeah. Well, I think, John, I think you said it earlier, it was like human centric. I think that's a word that you said, or it was in
human
another
culture. Yeah. Human anthropology.
Yeah. And you have to have that in building a family, in building a business, and because again, you're in business when you are building a family business, you're employing people and they have families. And if you are showing them and demonstrating them in your own family how to do that in a healthy way and a successful way. And that's where it's like a lot of people like this, like I'll use my dad for an example. Like he was saying, like, he goes, I get so, he beams with pride when he can talk about how his kids are doing, because, and I could be honest, like we grew up in a family business, but it really didn't feel like we were growing up in a family business. I don't know how to describe that in a way. And like this discussion is actually kind of making me reflect a lot on my upbringing, in the greatest way possible, because like, it's again, like we have a great relationship, and it's because again, you were back to your thing about mothers. My mom was the entrepreneur in our family, even though she didn't realize it. She was running our family and doing everything to keep our family first, and not necessarily the business at the forefront of everybody's minds. It was our family comes first.
That gives me chills.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jacob's mom, for being awesome. Because
she's a saint.
I mean, think about what is entrepreneurship, right? It's taking disparate resources, combining them in a new way to create a thing that wasn't there before. That's dinner. That's breakfast for a 3-year-old. That's nesting. this is really built into that instinct, that feminine genius, right? And I think that's wonderful that our society has come far enough to where there's space for that, but then also recognizing the beauty and the just value of that in the home.
Mm-hmm.
And for men, I think for women too, but like men just seem to like really lack the self-awareness that it takes to like question and reflect on your own beliefs about what is the purpose of business. And you said it beautifully, Sam, because the purpose of business, the answer to that question really makes all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. Is it a way to generate wealth? Yes, right? And in fact, there are only a few really bad answers to what is the purpose of business, right? Like, okay, drug dealing is bad business, right? Like, you hurting your client, like that's not okay. But like generally what you said is like one of the most simple answers that I've adopted from Andreas Widmer at Catholic University of America is that business is like marriage and that its purpose is to create products and services that serve the world, serve a particular need. It's always other focused. So create and then support. So support the client, support the employees, support the logarithmic number of different things that go into it, right? Because the myth of the maverick is so strong that everybody thinks, oh, Steve Jobs did it all by himself. No, in fact, no. And even if you have the really unique business where it's just you and one customer, it's still other focused. So create, support, and then reward. And not just the owner of the business, the entrepreneurial originator of the enterprise, but reward everybody that's involved. Reward the customer in solving their problem. Reward the employees in just labor and great work experience and just a human like dream of this is my job. Like you want people that work with you to be like, I get paid to do this. This is awesome. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody else or them. And then reward the people that took on the risk and invested the immense amount of time and energy, imagination, money to create this entity, this enterprise. They should be rewarded because if they are self-aware and they see how that rolls into their family and their children and their offspring and their community, they're like, this is good. We should do more of this. And that takes an enormous level of self-awareness when you can be like, hey, I'm good at arbitrage. I make money doing that. I can do it ad infinitum and have ad infinitum wealth. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? What's the money really for? And honestly, the money is kind of the easiest part. I mean, there's trillions of dollars chasing value currently in the economy that they're not finding a match, right? I think this is why we're podcasting about what is it to buy and sell a business, because there is a ton of capital out there that hasn't found a good use yet. So money's easy. What we need is imagination and intense willingness to do the hard-ass work to create the entities and the products and the services, the innovation that needs to happen for us to really break through the ceiling of complexity that we find ourselves in. We're at the end of an era. 500 years ago was the Protestant Reformation, right? You also had the Gutenberg printing press, which ended up with the Gutenberg Bible, which increased literacy at an exponential rate. So we're at a similar place where, okay, we've got the internet and we're starting to modify our social norms to be more dignified to everybody. And okay, so what's the convergence of all of that? And it's not going to converge and become if we've alienated all the 20-somethings so that they're like, look, peace out. I'm going to hang out in the basement and I don't want to talk to any of you guys.
It's and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and they said Gen Alpha is going to be the most intelligent generation out there, but they're going to lack the most wisdom.
Oof.
Yeah. Man, that's deep right there.
Yeah, it hurts.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a really painful 360 review I got one time.
Yeah, but their point was, again, it's like we need to begin thinking about the generations behind us.
So in your what is the difference? What is wisdom, Jacob? What is wisdom? I agree 100%.
Yeah, and what they were saying with wisdom is it was experiences. And that's what they were equating it to, is because, like, again, you said they tuck themselves down to search on technology all day long. AI is going to do a lot of things for them. They can get all the information at their fingertips, but they're not actually going to apply it. They're not going to apply it through experiences. And that's it. That's what they were talking about, is like the wisdom they will not have is they don't experience it. They're not experiencing anything. Not meant anything, but like that's what they're equating to.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Seriously. It's amazing to me how bad human beings are at the adjacent possible. Like the new innovative product, idea, firm, process, it's in the room most of the time. We just don't see it because we're so attached to what is. We're so used to optimizing what is.
Right.
But we didn't get to what is unless there was a whole generation of people that were like, what's not? What's missing? And how do we put something there?
Yeah. I want to talk about that a little bit more because you've mentioned to me this idea before of like the founder trap. And we've talked a lot about this sort of this focus, this integration of purpose, and this idea that money's the easy part. It's the meaning that's difficult. And money without meaning is just really kind of empty and hollow.
It's greed.
Yeah. And it perpetuates all this bad behavior. It really thrives on disintegration, pulling people away from something where there's a clear meaning on stuff. But when you look at, how people get there in the first place, it feels like there's just so much focus on, like what is rather than what's possible, because they've lost sight of that meaning. And talk to me a little bit more about how you think people end up in that place to start with, where they've lost sight or they didn't even think about, why am I doing this? Why is this important? And they become so ingrained in, the identity of their business, if you will.
It's, to me, the difference between an algorithmic problem and a heuristic problem. When we live in a world of algorithms where that's how AI works, right? And how modern dating works. You give it a certain amount of information, it can predict with relative certainty what the outcome will be. That's a recipe. That's an algorithm. A lot of it I blame on our modern education. Our pre-K through higher ed is designed for success at 22 years old and 62 years old. So success looks like you get an awesome job, 100% placement, right? That's what colleges like to say, 100% placement after graduation. So all of our grads, and we can say the average salary, right? So it's a quantitative approach. It's driven by an algorithm, because in order to get there, you have to have the right recipe to do that. That's an algorithm. But creativity is a heuristic. It means that we don't know how, and a lot of times entrepreneurs will be like, I'm not really sure. There was this like moment. There was this like lightning strike moment or happy accident that happened, right? And we just had the wisdom to know that, oh, this isn't actually failure. This is just Heinz 57, right? This is filament number 10,001, right? But that even then is an algorithmic process. If you just throw enough stuff and keep good records, you're going to figure it out eventually. Living in an algorithmic world, we don't understand how we got here through creative processes, through trial and error, through pure dissatisfaction, right? We all live in this state of being completely dissatisfied with life, right? I'm hungry, so I won't do anything about it unless I have a vision of how to be unhungry. Okay, Freddy's. Thank you, Freddy's. Freddy's exists. Cool. I believe then if I go to Freddy's and order a hamburger, I will be less hungry. Okay, cool. But then this dissatisfaction that you can't name, like what is wrong with the world? What's wrong with me? I'm not sure. I know something's wrong, which is I think why we're having like this bubble explosion of like coaching. Right, one-on-one coaching, which I think is I love doing this. It's wonderful work. But eventually at some point that will converge and it'll create something else. So the emergent of what's possible is what we really need to focus on. But we've trained young people to look at a target and be like, I want that. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a CEO. I want to be a doctor, whatever it is, it's a predefined role. And there are many of them, and they are all very good and essential, but they just basically, like they're a cake, you just put the right ingredients together and out pops a cake. Well, you're not a cake. You're human and you're participating and you have a soul and you have feelings. And how did they jive with, well, how do I know what if I go through pre-med and to become a surgeon and then the first time I see blood, I faint? What a mess that would be, right? So how do you then pull all of that forward into time, bring it into the now? Like, you want to build your own house one day? Cool. Here's a hammer. Go hammer this nail into that wood and tell me how it goes. Whack. Ooh, I just destroyed my thumb. I don't like that. Maybe this isn't what I want, right? So the exposure is important. Mark Twain said that travel is the death of prejudice because you go and you see other cultures and they're surviving just differently, right? And so exposure is a huge thing. My parents were great at that, basically because they had wanderlust. Like my sister and I, before I was 12, before she was 16, we had been to each of the 48 continental United States.
Wow.
Plus Canada and Mexico, all by car.
Wow.
I mean, it was brutal, but to have that exposure is huge.
Yeah.
So I guess to get back to the rambling answer of
It was a rambling question.
Of your question, right? We need to figure out how to tap into the imagination, and then get it from inside of here and inside of here into the world. So then we can be objective about it. Then we can hold it up and we can look at it and be like, okay, this is all right. Some sort of artifact. The virtue of techne is a fun one to think about, that you made a thing because it exists. That's good. Could it be better? Could you add beauty to it? And beauty is different than pretty, right? Beauty is like, how good? Like, is it deep inside that it is good? So anyway.
No, that's awesome.
But business is a great vehicle for that.
Yeah.
Look at your dad didn't wake you up at 11 o'clock just because you had done a crappy job. He was like, take ownership of yourself, I bet, right? This is about your way of life.
Yeah, my grandfather used to say it really well. Square and level is what you do square and level. There's a whole lot deeper meaning. I could do a whole entire podcast about square and level. Oh, yeah. Grandpa was one I learned a lot from on that one. But yeah, it was everything you do is square and level.
That's wisdom.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, what happens? It wants to fall into the ocean.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, God bless people that like living next to a lake, but like your whole life is keeping that house from falling into the lake. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But square and level. If you start there, you'll probably stay there.
Yep. For sure.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, John, thanks for joining us today. Do you have any, specific pieces of advice or what's your best advice for folks that may have a family business or be looking at building kind of that family culture as they think about especially kind of starting that process of establishing and refining that deeper meaning, that clear purpose and direction that's really going to help them unify their family and grow something of significance into the future?
I have so many things. To me, it's all about that self-awareness and pursuit of the interior elevation. So being willing to ask yourself the hard questions. How am I looking at business? Is this just manifesting dominion over the material world, or is this creating an economic engine that drives human flourishing aligned to the common good? And that takes a great deal of time and reflection and patience. I heard the other day, the word vulnerability gets thrown around a lot. And it's like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't think I should cry in front of people all the time, right? But this idea of vulnerability as public intimacy, being willing to, not too much, but share a little bit more. If you're in a relationship with people that you trust and you're getting to know them, maybe share a little bit more with your children. Share a little, like, this is what it was like for me. Now, you definitely don't want to share all of the things that you did that were naughty or bad, because then it builds a relativistic idea in the minds of your children. Like, oh, well, dad did this, so I'm not at least that bad. Or, dad at 27 was doing this, so I'm way ahead of dad. You don't want to do that. But elevating your self-awareness toward your purposes, right? And have a purpose.
Yeah.
Have a dream that's so big that it won't be fulfilled in your lifetime. There's really nothing wrong with being an irrational optimist in a world of rational pessimists. What difference does it make? We're all still dealing with reality, right? And trying to eat food, live indoors, have clothing, not squander our gifts, but like be magnanimous. Have big dreams. And not just like objective, like moonshots. Oh, we're going to Mars. Okay, thanks, Elon. Let's go to Mars. That sounds fun. But like, what about the soul that can be magnified in a great way, right? And then you got to go do it. You can't just be a dreamer. You got to actually go and do it and step into the space and be vulnerable and be willing to cry and bleed and smell like you worked in the garden all day or worse. Steel mills apparently are very stinky, I've learned. So milling and forges and all that. So it's not a clean thing in terms of like, you're gonna do human stuff, but do it for human purposes, for the good of other humans.
Yeah. Amen.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. Man, what a great conversation. I always come away with like a lot to think about after having a chat with John, and I hope that all of our listeners do as well. Have an awesome day, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.